For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Kate. I'm obviously a Beachbody coach, and I'm also a registered nurse. I've always been very interested in wellness and prevention and taking care of ourselves so that we don't get sick. And that was part of the reason that I ended up becoming a nurse. Nursing itself was a practicality. I wanted to do med school, and then after working as a nurse for a few years, I realized that I really didn't have the platform that I wanted here in Canada to be able to practice preventative medicine and wellness promotion. We really have a shitty platform in Canada to be able to do these things in healthcare, which seems so counterintuitive. So after having done my nurse's degree and then done prerequisites for med school, I was still searching, even though I was working as a registered nurse and traveling around and working in rural emergency departments. In 2014, I lost my brother unexpectedly in a workplace accident. He was a year younger than me, and he left behind two small children who were only 2 and 3 years old. And my world changed quite dramatically. And I went from being this really fun-loving, upbeat, glass half full sort of person to somebody who was really questioning the world around me and whether I was still going to be the same person coming out the other end of it. So he died the end of June. I went home and spent the month home with my family in Ontario for July, and we were literally in the middle of moving when he passed. So I ended up flying back out west in August to start my new life in British Columbia with my boyfriend. And he went off to work, and I knew nobody. And so I spent the majority of my days alone, and I was just really grieving. And I didn't have the motivation to work out, which had never been a problem for me. And I was just feeling really down in the dumps. And eating was a means to an end, and I gained a little bit of weight. And I knew I had to pull myself out of it. So I booked a contract to go away and nurse, and I contacted Christina and asked to join one of her accountability groups. And that's when I found out about the coaching opportunity. And I haven't looked back. I absolutely love coaching. It was definitely my calling. I am extremely passionate about it. It's the exact platform that I've been looking for pretty much my entire life to practice the preventative medicine that I want to. And so I'm really excited to be able to do this call for you guys tonight, because this is combining two passions for me. And I'm so happy to be able to share some skills, because I'm not a really talented person. I do okay with talking, and I'm a great nurse. I care a lot, but I'm not one of those people that can like crochet or who's really good at art or really great photographer. So being able to share my skills with you guys tonight is a real honor. So tonight we're going to talk about diabetes and the 21-day fix, what you need to know to empower your clients for success. There's a lot of technical stuff in here, and I've really had to break things down into layman's terms, and I have written some notes so that I can kind of talk through the slides. So if you're having any trouble understanding anything, just let me know, and I will break things down a little bit better for you. So this is how blood sugar is normally regulated in the body. So you can see that you've got your pancreas, and if you eat, you end up with high blood sugar. Your pancreas releases insulin, and that insulin will help your tissues bind with that sugar, to uptake that sugar, and that'll lower your blood sugar. And when your blood sugar lowers to a certain degree, glucagon is then secreted to raise your blood sugar levels again. And I'm going to run through this all with you guys. So basically what happens, and just get to the next slide here. So you eat a meal, and about 10 minutes later, insulin is released from the beta cells in the pancreas, signaled by the influx of sugar in the bloodstream. So also at this time, incretins are released in the small intestine, and that decreases the rate of absorption of the nutrients in the bloodstream, and it decreases your food intake. So it kind of starts signaling, oh, you've taken in this food and you're throwing a massive influx of sugar into your system, and it tries to signal things to kind of slow it down. It also stimulates insulin secretion at this point, and it suppresses the glucagon secretion. So what happens is insulin works like a key to allow glucose to enter your cells. Without insulin, sugar can't get into your cells. It's secreted to allow the uptake of the excess glucose into the liver, the striated muscles, which is our muscles that we use to build our muscles, as well as adipose tissue or fat tissue. It's like the key that unlocks the cells to glucose. So this goes on for about a couple hours. The insulin's a peptide hormone. It's created by the beta cells in your pancreas. And it's central to regulating carbohydrate and fat metabolism in your body. Insulin is an anabolic or growth promoting enzyme and has many major roles. So it obviously increases the uptake and use of glucose by insulin sensitive cells. So that's your liver, your striated muscle, and your fat cells. It encourages intracellular storage of glucose in the form of glycogen in the liver and lipids in adipose tissue. So instead of your body taking that glucose and just getting rid of it, you store it in your liver for later, and you also store it in your adipose tissue, so in your fat cells, and that's kind of where it sits. Insulin also inhibits the breakdown of glycogen and in the liver cells and lipids in the fat cells. So as long as there's insulin circulating in your body, it tells your liver and your adipose cells to hold on to its sugars because you don't need more, because the insulin's been secreted because there's already enough in the bloodstream. So it says, hey, hold on to that. We don't need that right now. We don't need any more sugar. And stimulates the uptake of amino acids and the synthesis of proteins. So this is obviously really important. Proteins are essential in every single system and every single breakdown and everything that our body does. We need proteins and enzymes to do this. So it's really important that we're uptaking fresh amino acids and synthesizing proteins on a regular basis. And you can see why, if you have problems with insulin and you're unable to do these things, it's really going to delay a lot of the processes in your body. Insulin also inhibits intracellular breakdown of proteins. So it prevents your cells themselves from breaking down their proteins as a source of glucose to be used for powering those cells. So it wants to protect the proteins that are in the cells. And it triggers DNA synthesis along with cell growth and differentiation in some cells. And that's basically saying that it basically is responsible, or it helps your whole body grow. So what happens is 2 hours after you're done digesting your meal, blood glucose levels start to drop. So there's a few places in our body that we have to constantly have glucose, and they're not able to store it on its own. A couple of these places are your brain. Your brain always needs a glucose supply, and if you are lacking sugars for even a very short period of time, you obviously end up in a lot of trouble, and you start getting confused, and you can end up destroying brain cells essentially. And red blood cells is another area. So what happens is 2 hours after you're done digesting your meal, blood glucose levels start to drop. And at that time, the insulin stops being secreted and glucagon starts being secreted. So glucagon is kind of like the opposite of insulin. It's another hormone that's secreted by the pancreas, by the alpha cells rather than the beta cells. And low blood glucose levels cause the pancreas to secrete it, and then this causes the liver to convert the glycogen stores. So the glucose that the liver has stored, it starts releasing, and it starts converting it back to glucose to be readily available in the bloodstream. So then it's released into the bloodstream, and your blood sugar levels are kept steady. So this is a process that's constantly going on in our bodies on a regular basis. And if you have a disruption in that, that's where you run into trouble, because you can see it's a pretty fine balance to keep those sugar levels within a normal range within our blood. And if you don't have enough sugar, then you end up in trouble. And if you have too much sugar, you end up in trouble. Okay, so if you guys have any questions along the way, try and write them down for later. If I'm going too fast, just please write in chat, slow down, because I do tend to be a fairly quick talker, and I realize that a lot of this information is, it's pretty technical. So if I'm speaking too fast, just let me know. So what is diabetes? There's two main types, and that's type 1 and type 2. And don't get me wrong, there's also gestational diabetes and other problems with diabetes, but those are the main two types. Type 1 diabetes is also known as juvenile diabetes. It occurs when our immune system destroys the beta cells in the pancreas. So it's an autoimmune disease that generally occurs when we're and what happens is our immune system attacks our beta cells and destroys them. And without the beta cells, the pancreas can't produce insulin. This is only about 5% of the population with diabetes. There are various hypotheses as to why this occurs. One of them is that some of the protein that we take in milk as children, when it's not completely broken down, as is the case, it can resemble our beta cell protein, so it's recognized as foreign. And so instead of our body realizing that beta cell protein is different than these other protein fragments because they resemble each other so closely, it turns around and attacks our beta cells. But that's just one of many hypotheses as to why this happens. They don't really have a full grasp on it. Type 2 diabetes, which is far more common, is also much more complex. And this is what you're going to predominantly see as coaches. So when people ask to join your groups or ask to order Shakeology, or you're talking to them and they go, well, I'm diabetic, generally this is what we're talking about here. And that's right, Audrey, it can be reversible. Type 2, and we're going to get into that. Type 1 is completely unreversible because your beta cells have been destroyed. So you're having to use outside sources of insulin in order to regulate your blood sugar levels. It's a different beast, but we're going to try and focus on type 2 diabetes because type 1 diabetes is different. And Audrey, is it okay if I share a little bit, just kind of the basics about you with people as far as, okay, so Audrey is a type 1 diabetic. Audrey is very much used to adjusting her own insulin. Type 2 diabetics aren't. So this is why we're focusing on type 2 diabetics, because somebody with type 1 diabetes is going to be able to adjust their insulin based on what their needs are. Some people are on pumps, so it's a little bit maybe less common than it used to be, but many people with type 1 diabetes are comfortable with and can adjust their own insulin doses and insulin levels, whereas type 1 diabetics generally don't titrate their own insulin, and that's why it's important kind of for us as coaches when we have type 2 diabetics on insulin joining our challenges, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So on to type 2 diabetes. So type 2 diabetes accounts for 90 to 95% of the diabetic population. It's a result of a combination of things. So you have insulin resistance, beta cell dysfunction, excess glucagon, and decreased incretins. So we're going to kind of run through this very, very slowly here. So this is progressive. So usually the cells become insulin resistant, and you end up with excess insulin being secreted by your beta cells. And as this goes on, and this is kind of they call it kind of pre-diabetes. This can go on for years before you start to really destroy your beta cells. So what happens is your beta cells are secreting excess insulin, trying to make up for the insulin resistance, so that your cells will take up more glucose. And what happens is over time they just finally burn out. So insulin resistance, it's a combination of inherited predisposition and environmental factors that cause less glucose to be taken up for the same amount of insulin secreted. So what happens is your pancreas is running along and it's secreting its insulin and it's secreting its insulin and it's secreting its insulin. And normally your body is taking up the glucose and it's fine. Well, all of a sudden it secretes its insulin and the glucose is still in the bloodstream. So it secretes more insulin, but the glucose isn't really going anywhere. And this goes on over and over and over again, sometimes for years at a time. And it's just trying to make up for the fact that your cells are less sensitive to the insulin that's being secreted. So the inherited factor can increase the likelihood of resistance when other criteria are met. So you need to understand that that doesn't mean that it's inherited, and if you have the gene that you're going to get it. What it means is there are multiple genes that can lead to the contribution of this occurring. But if there aren't environmental factors at play for this to happen, you're not necessarily going to develop type 2 diabetes. Genes are very interesting in that we can turn them on and off with the environmental factors. So don't think that because grandma had type 2 diabetes, you're doomed and you're going to get it too. That's not the way it works. So these are some of the reasons why you can kind of develop type 2 diabetes with an inherited predisposition. What happens is when there's excess fatty acids and triglycerides are available to muscle tissue, it'll break down the fatty acids before it uptakes the glucose through normal mechanisms. So this is kind of part of the insulin resistance. So what happens is your pancreas secretes the insulin, and but your cells, but specifically it happens a lot with your muscle tissue. If you have some excess fatty acids and triglycerides, is floating around in your muscle tissues, your muscles kind of look at that and go, oh, well, we'll just break that down instead. So it doesn't go to the trouble of binding the insulin with the glucose and bringing it into the cells. It just goes for the quick fix, which is the fatty acids. So it isn't taking up the glucose like it normally would. So the less glucose is taken up despite the same amount of insulin. And the liver becomes less responsive to the inhibiting effects of the insulin, because normally the insulin tells it not to release more sugars. But because it's also becoming more resistant to the insulin, it continues to produce excess glucose and it releases it into the bloodstream. So you kind of have a multifaceted problem where not only are you not absorbing the glucose in the bloodstream, but now your liver is also kicking in and it's actually releasing more glucose into that same bloodstream. So then there's a beta cell dysfunction. So beta cells release less insulin as type 2 diabetes progresses, but it also secretes it slower and at different patterns than in healthy people. So the glucose cannot be cleaned out from the bloodstream and it damages tissues, and hyperglycemia will ensue. So it's also a combination of inherited and environmental factors, although this does not show up until many years after insulin resistance. So you can have insulin resistance for many years, or what they call prediabetes, where you have higher levels of sugars in your bloodstream and you also have high levels of insulin in your bloodstream. And this can go on for quite some time before you actually experience this beta cell burnout. So beta cells burn out and they become unable to keep up with demand for insulin caused by resistance. Also, you have more cells. This is one of the reasons why obesity can be such a huge problem in type 2 diabetes, is because you have so many more adipose cells that you're trying to get glucose into, and with the insulin resistance, your body it can't keep up. The constant increased levels of glucose and insulin actually further deteriorate the beta cells, and the dysfunction worsens over time. So it becomes a dooming cycle where, you're increasing as much insulin as you can, and you have all these sugars, and they're further deteriorating the beta cells, and the beta cells are continuing to try to keep up, and it's just not able to. So then the other two reasons for the type 2 diabetes are excess glucagon and decreased incretins. So those with type 2 diabetes secrete excess glucagon, which prompts the liver to release more glucose, which exacerbates the hyperglycemia or the high blood sugar. So there's not only in the beta cells, but the alpha cells, there's also some dysfunction, which it means that this glucagon is excreted in excess. Individuals also have fewer incretins in the small intestine. So the nutrient absorption isn't as delayed, which spikes the blood sugars. And that sends more signals to the pancreas to stimulate insulin secretion. But they're not as strong. I know it's really technical stuff, guys, but it's important for you guys to understand that there's more than one reason and more than one cause for this. And if you have a good understanding, then you can kind of see why people end up with some of the problems they do and how we're going to be able to help them down the road. Because, if you understand all the side effects of having something like type 2 diabetes, you're going to understand why it impacts their muscles and why it impacts their energy levels and things like that. And that's really important when we're trying to kind of help people with this. So there are risk factors that are highly correlated with the development of type 2 diabetes, and these include obesity, physical inactivity, unhealthy diet, hyperglycemia, stress, and chronic inflammation. So obesity is one thing that we know is an epidemic. It's a big part of our motto. We know this. So it's excess body fat. It causes insulin resistance. It's more important if it's intra-abdominal body fat. So if you're carrying a lot of adipose tissue around your middle, that's a higher indicator that you could potentially develop type 2 diabetes than if you just have kind of a generalized puffiness to you. So that increases the fatty acids, which once again decreases the glucose uptake. So you end up with all these fatty acids and triglycerides. It's another form of energy. So your body's utilizing that rather than using glucose that's in your bloodstream. It also, what happens is you secrete less adiponectin, and that normally decreases your insulin resistance. So you have another factor that's going to increase your resistance to insulin. So it's really fighting against you. And it also increases your cytokine secretion, which is increased inflammation, which is going to increase your likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes. Physical inactivity, the triglycerides in the muscle cells aren't being broken down. You're putting on more fat, you're not working your muscles. And good exercise is a good counterweight to insulin resistance. It helps decreases it because you end up burning off those excess triglycerides. So then you start utilizing glucose properly. So if you don't have those triglycerides to burn off in your muscle because you've already used them, then your body starts looking for glucose in the bloodstream again, and you'll start using it properly again. And proper physical activity can actually prevent type 2 diabetes. Like, that's the thing, is so many cases, probably the majority of type 2 diabetes cases are preventable. It's just we really don't recognize that as a society. We forget that it's preventable. So diet. We know how important diet is in our life. Any diet that leads to an increase in obesity is going to likely lead to the increased presence of diabetes. Okay, so if you're eating a shitty diet, you're not only going to get fat, you're probably going to get type 2 diabetes. And that's as blunt as I can put it. And that might seem blunt, but that's the way it works. And unfortunately, a large part of that is education, and a large part of that is socioeconomic status. So if you're poor and uneducated, you don't know what food you should be eating. And even if you know, you can't afford it anyways. So you're going for that quick processed junk food because it's more affordable, or you don't know better. You can get an entire meal at McDonald's instead of, going and buying a salad. So people unfortunately don't know. And there's also a lot of information out there that's very contradictory. I mean, you can pull up a million different diets that tell you this is the way you're supposed to eat, based on everything from low protein, low carb, low fat, blood group, it's crazy the kinds of diets you can find out there. So it's very contradictory. It's really difficult for people to get a clear understanding of what they should be eating. So increased carb diet stresses your glucose lowering capacity. So if you're taking in a lot of, especially simple carbs and a lot of sugar, it just spikes your blood sugar levels, and then you're scrambling to catch up, and you're putting a lot of pressure on your pancreas to release that insulin. So you're more likely. Yeah, that's right, Audrey. You do need, that's why I was saying simple carbohydrates. So if you're eating a lot of basic sugars, very, white breads, if you're eating a lot of high sugar fruits and you're not looking at the sugar content and how things are released, if you're eating a lot of sweets, like that's a big problem, right? So with the diet, and if you want if you have a high fat diet with low fiber, it actually worsens your insulin resistance. So then we've got hyperglycemia. So if you have high sugars as it is, it's going to further contribute to insulin resistance and quicker beta cell burnout as well. Stress. So a lot of people don't know this, but stress activates your sympathetic autonomic nervous system, which is your fight or flight system. And this can be everything from, just basic stress that we don't even realize that we're stressing over on a daily basis, just those little stressors that are in our lives every single day. But what happens is you secrete cortisol because of the perceived stress. And you also take sugar and you dump it into your bloodstream because your body is registering that there's a threat. So it wants to make sure that if you need to fight or you need to flee, you're going to have the sugar available to your muscles in order to do so. So you end up inadvertently dumping sugar into your bloodstream when you don't need to be because you're stressed out. It increases your cortisol, which will increase your blood glucose levels. So you just end up with this reaction, even if you're not necessarily in a life-threatening sort of situation. It can happen to basic stressors in everyday life, and that's why stress relief and finding balance is so important. And it's one of the most under-realized and underutilized things in our healthcare system today. If you look at pretty much any major disease process, you can find stress and inflammation as one of the causes. And so the last thing is inflammation. So when you have chronic release of cortisol from stress, you can end up with chronic inflammation, which increases your cortisol secretion, which further causes more hyperglycemia, and you end up with type 2 diabetes. So it's a never-ending cycle. It's really, really unfortunate, never-ending cycle. So management of prediabetes. So this is when people say, well, I'm pre-diabetic. This means that they basically have insulin resistance and they have like basically hypersecretion of insulin going on, as well as hyperglycemia. So they have excess insulin in their system, they have excess sugars in their system, but they haven't been diagnosed with diabetes yet because at this point their beta cells haven't started failing. They need a major lifestyle overhaul. This is where we come in. If people are telling you they're pre-diabetic, this is where they can stop the bus on this disease. Seriously. This is where they can seriously protect their beta cells and prevent that damage from occurring in their pancreas. So what they say is you should be losing 5 to 10% of your body weight through a combination of increased physical activity and a diet with fewer calories, more fiber, less saturated fat, and no trans fat. Guys, like, this is what we do every single day. This is what we do. So to sit there and feel ineffective when we're dealing with people and their lives, like the side effects and the other diseases that occur because of diabetes, like there's too many to list. It's crazy. Being able to prevent that, that's power. Like, that's powerful. And especially when so many people are afflicted with this. There are so many people that are pre-diabetic as well as diabetic on this planet. But there's so many people that are pre-diabetic and they have no idea. And they're not properly coached by healthcare professionals. The amount of information that I'm finding that is actually missing when people come to me and ask me questions about diabetes or how to manage their diabetes or how to do the 21-day fix with their pre-diabetes is just it's unbelievable. So we can make a huge difference with this population because we're like the kings and queens of lifestyle overhaul. Like, we've all done it. We've all done it, you know? So here's where the 21-day fix in diabetes comes in. Clients with type 2 diabetes can do the 21-day fix and experience fantastic results. So the thing about type 2 diabetes is that, yes, there has been damage done to the pancreas, but you haven't completely wiped out your pancreas or your beta cells like you have with type 1 diabetes. If you decrease the amount of adipose tissue that you're carrying around and you decrease the insulin resistance that's going on, then your insulin that you're producing is going to be able to work better. And as that happens and there's less sugars and there's less insulin just hanging out in your bloodstream, destroying your beta cells are going to work more efficiently. So the first thing you should do with people that have type 2 diabetes and want to do the 21-day fix is help them set a realistic goal. But you need to take into consideration a few things. This is likely a huge change for them, and a diagnosis can be scary. If they have type 2 diabetes, there's a good chance, it's not even a chance. As I said, prediabetes lasts for years. So if they have a full diabetes, diagnosis, this has been going on for years. We're talking about changing habits that have been ingrained in these people's minds for years. Not only are we asking them to start moving more, we're telling them they have to completely change the way that they're eating. That's massive. That can be so cripplingly overwhelming for people that they just freeze. So with these people, it really is about baby steps. They are going to need a lot of support from you. But it's completely worth it because watching how much it transforms their lives and it transforms their health is amazing. So you need to be careful, and this isn't something that's going to come easily for them, and they're going to need you along the way. So the progress will likely be slower for them. Insulin stimulates the uptake of amino acids and the synthesis of protein. So if this is dysfunctional, as it is with diabetes, muscle growth will be slower, muscle exhaustion will happen quicker. Your body isn't functioning at its best, and all of the systems and processes in the body aren't functioning at its best. Like, think about how you feel when you've missed some sleep for a couple of days. You just feel run down and you don't have any energy and you don't really want to do anything. You're kind of lacking motivation. Well, think about your body not ever running 100%, where you never feel great. And not only just, mentally or about yourself as far as confidence and that goes, but you just don't feel well. And that's what these people are dealing with day in and day out. So encourage them and don't let them get up. This will improve as they progress. If they're on insulin, they'll need to inform their physician, as they will likely need to titrate their insulin. As I was saying, with someone with type 1 diabetes, often they titrate their own insulin, and this is not a big deal. Somebody with type 2 diabetes, if they are on insulin, should not titrate their insulin on their own. The only time they should be titrating their own insulin is if this is something that they normally do on a regular basis. The vast majority of them do not, and the vast majority of them can potentially harm themselves if they're doing this on their own. Like your blood sugar drops too low, you can die. Like that's the bottom line. If it goes too high, you can go into something called diabetic ketoacidosis and die. So this isn't something to fuck around with, to put bluntly. You want to make sure that they are talking to their physician if they are on insulin and they want to do this program. The biggest thing that I've run into is that people find that their sugars drop. What happens is because they're working out and they're utilizing more glucose and they're eating properly, they need less insulin from an outside source. So most of the time it's going to be about their insulin needs decreasing, and the physician's going to need to decrease their insulin injections. But this is something that they have to be on the same page with their doctor for. This isn't something that we should be doing for them, okay? If they're on an oral medication, yeah, that's right, Audrey. Shakeology is amazing for helping people have steady sugars. It's an awesome thing. People say, "Can I drink it if I'm diabetic?" 100% you can. It will actually steady out your sugar, so you won't be having those spikes, and you're going to notice. Generally, people notice a decrease in their sugar readings overall, which is fantastic. If people are on oral medications for the type 2 diabetes, metformin will not cause hypoglycemia. So if they're on it, is this when you give them that doctor form? I don't know if I'm familiar with the doctor form, Callie. I will have to talk to you about that afterwards. But honestly, what I just advise them to do is to go to their doctor and tell their doctor that they're going to be starting a new workout regimen, as well as a more balanced, healthy diet, and that they may need to be changing their insulin, and who they should contact when that happens, because they don't want to bottom out. Just being a little bit proactive about it will be better than them having these dips in their sugar, because it feels horrendous, and then you end up playing catch up, and people end up taking things that then spike their sugar, and it's brutal. So it's better if they can kind of go in before they start the 21-day fix, and just kind of give their doctor the heads up that they're going to be starting this and they're going to need some support in it. So the metformin doesn't cause low sugars, but there's a medication called gliclazide that can. So I just say talk to your doctor beforehand, just that way they're not going to end up at risk. So then people kind of say, but Kate, what about food choices? Hello, glycemic index. This isn't the end all and be all, but this will help people choose better foods when it comes to foods that are too sugary for them. It's a lifesaver for recommending food options, especially when it comes to fruits and veggies to your diabetic clients. You can save it to your computer or bookmark the site. I'm blown away by how few diabetes educators utilize this for the clients, and how many people with diabetes have no idea what it is. It was kind of developed because there was this low GI diet that was kind of produced. But I looked at this list and I'm like, this is a no-brainer for people with diabetes. Like, it tells you the sugar content in literally all foods. This is kind of an example. So the green light is the low glycemic index foods, and it tells you exactly what you can eat and what falls into those categories. So when we're doing our food groups for 21-day fix, and people are like, yeah, but what fruit can I eat? You can Google it. There's a million charts online for this, and it encompasses all foods. Like, it'll tell you pastas, breads, like everything. This is just a very simple one so that I could show you, because the other ones I wouldn't have been able to fit on the slide. But it literally tells you exactly what kind of fruits and veggies fall into the low glycemic area, or even the medium glycemic area. I would tell them to avoid anything that's in the red. I can't even read that right now because it's so bright. And also, if they're going to do, because it says all fruit juices except apple juice are yellow, I would tell them that this is usually usually 125 mils. This isn't even a full glass of fruit juice. Fruit juice isn't something that I really recommend to anybody personally, but anyways, this is kind of how where it fits in. But a serving of juice in this is considered like 125 mils, which is actually half a cup. So they should be aware of that. But it shows you your veggies too. Some veggies are higher in sugars than others, so if you can stick to ones that are lower, like carrots and beets tend to be a little bit higher. Potatoes are higher in sugar. So this is actually great. It's a great tool for those. Yeah, it is very good, Oriana, for everybody to kind of pay attention to this because you don't really want to have high spikes in your sugar, regardless of who you are. I mean, we've all had that experience where you get like that sugar rush when you've had too much sugar, and then you have that drop afterwards and you just feel horrible. How much sugar is in sugar? Cassie, if you Google it, there are printable versions. I just took a very basic one because there's so many of them on there. I just needed to find one that I could put onto a slide to kind of show you guys what's available. You know what? Honestly, Audrey, I think a lot of it is, but the thing is that like things like your fruit goes into, yeah, and the top on the list is best, that's for sure. But a lot of people would just look at the list and just pick something off the list. And this way you can kind of say to people, well, no, you can have your fruit. It's just these are better choices than others. Um, and yeah, it's just something that'll help people a little bit more because I find that that's the biggest question is like, well, I'm diabetic, how can I eat fruit? And it's a misconception that's out there because fruits are considered sugary and they do have natural sugars in them, but obviously the way it's released and how quickly it's released differs depending on what fruit you're utilizing. um, so yeah, I really found that came in handy as well. And then I found this food list for diabetes as well, which I thought was really interesting because it actually gives you kind of the portions as well, um, and the different groups. I don't know. I personally, I'd be sticking to the 21-day fix probably more than I would be sticking to a list. Um, carbs, carbs. The thing is, I don't find the carbs is a bad name because it talks to you. Carbohydrates, when they're broken down, are sugars. They're monosaccharides, disaccharides, polysaccharides. A protein breaks down into amino acids, and fats break down into fatty acids. So carbs, when they're broken down, are sugars. It's just a matter of whether they're slow released or fast release. And that's the big concern when you're diabetic is you need things that are more slow release and I mean, we could all use things that are more slow release that aren't going to spike our sugars because if you're diabetic, your pancreas just can't handle it, as you know. So it really comes down to what they break down to. It's just a lot of people don't realize that veggies and fruits are carbohydrates. Like you hear people saying, "Oh, I'm a low carb diet." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? You're cutting out like breads and pastas and rice?" Well, yeah. Well, what about fruits and vegetables? Well, no, I'm still eating those. Well, then you're not on a low carb diet, and I don't advise people to be. But there's just a huge misconception about what a carbohydrate is and what it breaks down to. But yeah, you have your carbs, your fats, and your proteins, and carbohydrates break down to basic glucose, whereas proteins break down to your amino acids and fats break down to fatty acids. They can all be used as forms of energy, but they're just utilized differently by the body. So that's kind of what I put together as far as the slideshow goes. Um, it's a day by day thing. It's a really difficult lifestyle change to make most of the time, but it's so worth it. And watching people reverse their disease like that's amazing. I mean, you hear these stories about people dropping their blood pressure or the cholesterol levels, and that's not always super tangible for us. But I mean, diabetes causes blindness. It causes delayed wound healing. It means that you can end up with a cut and it won't heal, or you don't notice a cut on your toe and you have to have your foot amputated. It leads to so much large spread. I mean, the cardiovascular effects of it. It leads to so much widespread disease that the amount of healthcare dollars that would be saved if we could just prevent type 2 diabetes would be absolutely amazing. Yeah, I hear you, Emily. it I tend to stay pretty up on the type 1 diabetes research just because I have some friends that have type 1. And I really do wish that there was some way that we could to reverse type 1, or if we could definitively say we know why. But like so many autoimmune diseases, we just don't have a clear answer on what causes type 1. Oh, really? I didn't know that. Audrey does as well. So there you go. Yeah, so are there any questions? I can turn the mics on if people want to talk, or you guys can turn your own mics on. It looks like I don't. Um, yeah, I can. I actually put it at the beginning of the chat, the entire. I put the entire slideshow, but I would be happy to share the slideshow elsewhere as well. No, it's not a problem at all, Audrey. I was really happy to have your input. As I said, it's a bit of a different beast for you because you have type 1 diabetes and you're very obviously experienced with this. I know that the majority of what people are dealing with is type 2, and like I said, kind of trying to tell people or suggest to people, what to do about their medications and their insulin, and that is a little bit far outside our zone as coaches, but we can at least help them approach their doctors and choose healthier choices as far as their foods go, and really support them in this as they're trying to make these really important lifestyle changes. Did anybody have any questions or anything that they wanted to share? No problem, Melissa. Chris, I really tried to cover what I could. It's one of those topics that's really difficult because every one of these processes, even the conversion of glucose into glycogen and back into glucose in the liver has like a massive, massive breakdown of steps in how it actually occurs. So just trying to keep it to as basic as possible, but allowing everybody to kind of understand all of the things that kind of go into causing and contributing to type 2 diabetes was important because it's not just the dysfunction of the beta cells or just the insulin resistance. Like there's so much more to it that really contributes to the disease process. Oh, you're welcome, Kelly. Well, thanks a lot, everybody, and it's been an absolute pleasure. And I hope you guys all have a great night. And if you think of any questions down the line, by all means, let me know. And otherwise, I'll make sure that we post this so that you guys can share it with people that are coming to you with any kind of questions. Or you can kind of watch it again if you need to take notes or if there's something that you need some clarification on. It was a little bit blunt in some areas, so if you don't feel that you want to share this with clients, that's fine, but it's definitely a resource that you can utilize for your teams. Okay, guys, have a great night. I'm going to stop recording this now.